The day everything went wrong. Imagine, you wake up tomorrow, and everything changes. The job you worked years to get is gone. The relationship you thought would last forever ends with a single conversation. The future you spent months planning disappears overnight. In moments like these, most people ask the same question. Why is this happening to me? It feels like the only question that matters, but what if? It's also the one question keeping you trapped. History is filled with people who faced impossible odds. Some were crushed by them, others were transformed by them. The obstacle was the same, the outcome was completely different. So what separated them? Was it luck, talent, willpower, or was it something far more invisible? More than 2,000 years ago, the Stoic philosophers believed something that sounds almost impossible. They believed the obstacle itself could become the path forward, not after it disappeared, not after life became easier, but because it existed. Ryan Holiday revived this ancient idea in one simple sentence: the obstacle is the way. At first, it sounds inspiring, maybe even unrealistic, until you realize every defining moment in your life began as a problem you never wanted. Think about it. The hardest conversation made you stronger. The biggest failure taught you the lesson success never could. The worst day of your life quietly became the beginning of a completely different person. Maybe life isn't asking, can you avoid obstacles? Maybe it's asking, what will you become because of them? Because the answer to that question might change the way you see every problem for the rest of your life. Act 1. The wall that doesn't exist. Imagine two people standing in front of the exact same obstacle. Point one sees the end, the other sees a beginning. The obstacle hasn't changed, only the person looking at it has. So why do two people experience the same event in completely different ways? Imagine losing your job. For one person, it's proof that life is unfair. They replay the moment again and again. Anger turns into blame, blame turns into hopelessness, and slowly, their future begins to shrink. Now imagine someone else. They lose the same job, they feel the same fear, the same uncertainty, the same disappointment, but after the silence, they ask a different question. What is this trying to teach me? Nothing around them has changed, only the meaning, and meaning changes everything. Ryan Holiday reminds us of a lesson that has survived for more than 2,000 years. We rarely suffer because of events themselves. We suffer because of the story we immediately create about them. A closed door becomes a disaster. A mistake becomes an identity. A delay becomes failure without realizing it. Our minds turn temporary obstacles into permanent prisons. Think about the last problem that kept you awake at night. At that moment, it felt enormous, impossible, like the world had stopped moving. But today, months later, how much of that pain came from the event itself, and how much came from the meaning you gave it? This is where almost everyone loses, not because life is too difficult, but because they decide what the obstacle means before they've seen what it can become. Every obstacle arrives as a question. Most people answer too quickly. They say, this is the end. The strongest people wait, observe, and quietly ask, what if this is the beginning? That single question has changed the course of history, and it might change yours. Act 2. The hidden opportunity. Imagine you're walking through a forest. The path is clear, everything feels easy. Then suddenly, a massive tree crashes in front of you. The road disappears. Most people stop, some turn around, others spend hours complaining about the tree, but a few do something different. They look around, and that's when they notice a path they would have never seen if the first one hadn't been blocked. Life works the same way. The obstacle doesn't just block your path, sometimes it reveals a better one. History gives us countless examples, but one stands above the rest. In the year 1919, a young soldier returned home after war. He had lost direction, his plans had collapsed, his future looked uncertain. Most people would have called it the end. Instead, he chose to study. Observe. Rebuild his life. Years later, that man became one of the greatest leaders of the ancient world ever studied, not because life was easy, but because hardship forced him to become someone stronger. Again and again, history repeats the same lesson. A failed business leads to an invention. A painful rejection leads to a better relationship. A devastating loss creates a person with deeper wisdom. The obstacle changes the direction, not the destination. But here's what makes this difficult. When you're inside the storm, you can't see the path, you only see the rain. That's why most people quit too early. They judge the chapter before reading the rest of the story. Ryan Holiday reminds us that perception is always the first battle. Before you solve the obstacle, you must stop calling it your enemy, because the moment you see every challenge as proof that life is against you, you've already surrendered, not to reality, but to your own interpretation. The strongest people aren't those who experience fewer problems. They're the ones who refuse to let problems decide what those problems mean. Sometimes, the greatest opportunity of your life arrives wearing the disguise of your greatest setback. Act 3. Fire reveals gold. Imagine standing in front of a furnace. A piece of gold and a piece of wood are placed into the same fire. The wood burns, the gold becomes purer. The fire didn't decide their fate. It only revealed what they were made of. Life works the same way. Pressure doesn't create character. It reveals it. In the year 1918, a young officer found himself surrounded by chaos. His empire was collapsing, his people were exhausted. Every decision seemed impossible. That man was Marcus Aurelius. History remembers him as one of the greatest emperors Rome ever had, but not because his life was peaceful, because it wasn't. Wars, plagues, political betrayal, loss, every year, another obstacle, yet in the middle of that chaos, he wrote something remarkable, not for the public, not for history, for himself. A reminder. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Centuries later, those private thoughts would inspire millions, including Ryan Holiday. Now think about that for a moment. Marcus Aurelius didn't wait for life to become fair. He accepted something most people spend their entire lives resisting. The obstacle wasn't interrupting his journey. It was the journey. Most of us spend years saying, "I'll be happy when this problem disappears. I'll start when life becomes easier. I'll move forward after everything is perfect." But perfection never arrives. Another problem always comes, another challenge, another uncertainty. If your happiness depends on life becoming obstacle-free, you'll spend your entire life waiting. The Stoics understood something timeless. You don't control what enters your life, you control who enters the obstacle, and sometimes, that's the only control you'll ever need. Every challenge asks the same question. Will you become smaller, or will you become stronger? The obstacle doesn't answer, you do. Act 4. The question that changes everything. Imagine, tomorrow morning, life gives you another obstacle, not a small one. A real one. A rejection. A failure. Bad news. A door that suddenly closes, your heart sinks, your mind immediately begins searching for an explanation. Why me? Why now? Why does this always happen? Without realizing it, those questions steal your power, because every question you ask determines the answer your mind will find. Ask, why is life against me? Your brain will collect evidence. Ask, why do I always fail? It will replay every mistake you've ever made. But change the question, and something extraordinary happens. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what is this trying to teach me? One question. An entirely different future. Ryan Holiday reminds us that every obstacle carries two gifts. The first is obvious, pain. The second is invisible, perspective. But only those willing to keep walking ever discover it. Think about the strongest person you know. Were they shaped by comfort, or by difficulty, by certainty, or by uncertainty, by easy victories, or by battles no one else could see? The people we admire are not people who escaped hardship. They're people who refuse to let hardship define them, and maybe that's the greatest misunderstanding about strength. Strength isn't built after the obstacle. It's built inside it, not because suffering is beautiful, not because pain is necessary, but because every challenge forces you to decide who you're going to be. Life doesn't ask, are you ready? It simply opens the door and waits for your answer point. One day, you'll look back at this chapter of your life, not as the moment everything went wrong, but as the moment everything began to change, because sometimes, the road you've been trying to avoid is the only road that leads where you're meant to go. The final chapter. Close your eyes for just a moment. Imagine yourself 10 years from now. Your future self is standing in front of you. They don't ask, did life treat you fairly? They don't ask, did everything go according to plan? They ask only one question. When life became difficult, did you stop, or did you become someone stronger? Because that's how lives are truly measured. Not by the number of obstacles we faced, but by the person those obstacles created. Maybe the obstacle in front of you today will disappear, maybe it won't, but one thing is certain, you will not leave it as the same person who entered it. Every challenge leaves a mark. The only choice you have is deciding whether that mark becomes a scar or a source of strength. Ryan Holiday's message isn't that life is fair. It isn't. His message isn't that pain is enjoyable. It isn't. His message is far more powerful. The obstacle was never your enemy. It was your invitation. An invitation to think differently. To act differently. To become differently. So the next time life places a wall in your path, don't ask, why is this happening? Stand still, take one breath, and ask, what kind of person is this obstacle asking me to become? Because sometimes, the obstacle was never blocking the road. It was building the person who could finally walk it. If this video changes your perspective on your suffering, subscribe, because the next obstacle you face may no longer feel like the end. It may feel like the beginning.